I get the icon in cornflower blue?
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 16 of Can I Get That Software in Blue? I'm one of your hosts, Chad Tindel, and along with me is my co-host, the MVP of VPs, the Sultana of Grafana, Steve, I hate elevator music, Mayzak.
Thanks for having me, Chad. I appreciate it. I love the intro as always.
we definitely have to level it up at some point.
Yeah.
All right. Usually we have guests on here who come from the software vendor side, kind of like Steve and I do, talking about how they approach the sales process. But today we're joined by someone who comes from the other side, the side of our customers, to bring that perspective to the pod. He was previously the director of architecture for Starwood Hotels and later at Standard & Poor's after that. Now he's vice president and head of architecture and innovation at Mutual of America Financial Group. His skills as an architect are worthy of high respect. He walks a high wire as an enterprise software buyer. He loves to surf at the beach, but tonight he's here to teach. Mike Russell, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys.
I love it. Welcome, Mike.
It's nice to be recording at night. We've had a couple of these in the past. We don't always do it, but we promised the audience when we do, we're going to be drinking. This makes it a little more fun for everybody. Steve, what are you drinking tonight?
So I'm drinking a Pinot Noir from a winery in Oregon called Argyle. It's not my favorite, but it was on the shelf, so I grabbed it. But
the top shelf, I hope.
middle shelf. But yeah, my wife does not let me touch some of her red wine in the wine fridge, which is very frustrating for me, but I do respect her wishes most of the time. So I get like the middle shelf stuff.
Oh, okay. Good. Mike, what do you got?
So I'm like way more ghetto than you guys. I got like the bottle of Apothic.
I was gonna say Schlitz. You drinking Schlitz malt liquor? What?
No, I got the Apothic. You know, it's probably like, I don't know. For some reason, I just got attracted to the label and bought it one day.
It's amazing what a good label design will do. It catches your eye, and you're like, "Oh, I'll try that."
Exactly.
Yeah.
A cool name, a cool label, and I'm in, right?
Exactly.
I mean, this is probably why more people are drinking water, because of liquid death.
That's such crazy branding.
I know, dude. First time I saw it, I was like, is this another seltzer?
I thought it was like an energy drink or something.
Oh, yeah. Good point. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Chad, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a 2005 Ridge Vineyards Cabernet from
Where's
Napa,
Ridge from?
Napa Valley.
Oh, okay.
It's our favorite Napa winery, one of our favorites. And I also pulled it off my wife's top shelf in this case. It was 05. It's almost 20 years old.
Dude.
So I had to ask permission first, but there's definitely perks to being married to a wine sommelier. So
Yeah.
I'm going to avail myself of the perks whenever I can.
It makes sense. I would too.
I actually opened it a few days ago. I cooked a steak for dinner a few days ago and opened it. So it's actually been airing out for a few days. It's so smooth. It's nice.
All right. Next time I'm over, I'm going to expect like a wine flight, just so we're clear.
Yeah, I'll give you a vertical flight because there's a particular bottle that I buy from Temecula, this is outside of San Diego, and I've bought every release for the last 10 years. So you can taste like the 2010, the 2015, the 2018, just see how it's changed over the years if you want to do that.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
But you got to come to New York first.
I'll be there in June.
All right. Well, let's dive in. We're actually really happy to have Mike here. He's got some great stories, I'm sure. He's a funny guy. Every time I talk to him, he makes me laugh really hard, and I like that about him. So, Mike, I think let's start with maybe a little background on what you do as an enterprise architect. Like maybe some people don't really know what that job is. Like, what's your day-to-day like?
So enterprise architect is like somewhere between like technical and like psychologist. You know what I mean?
Yep,
Like,
I know what you mean.
I've never heard it described that way, though.
and sprinkle in a little bit of sales too, right? But definitely the psychologist part is like heavy duty because you're like in the middle of everything. You know, you may not be the most technical guy and you may not know the business that well, but you're always like right smack in the middle of everything. It's about aligning people, really aligning people on solutions or capabilities, you know, even that could be even new software you bring in, getting all the tech people to say, okay, I could live with that product, and getting the business people to say, oh, wow, I love the color of that thing. right?
Is it
And
that the
then,
business people are coming to you with requirements of things that have to be deployed to meet certain regulatory concerns or whatever, and then you have to figure out what tech to run that on? Or
yeah, I mean, usually they, they would come with like some kind of issue, right? Like I can't do this or I can't do that, or it takes me so long to do this. And then you kind of, pick that apart and figure out like
what's an
yeah, the reason
what's an
why-
example of something that they couldn't do, and you
Yeah.
gotta go figure it out.
we're an insurance company, investment company, even like something very simple like electronic signatures, something we'd like totally take for granted. Like, everybody's gotten a mortgage and you e-sign and everything. It's like no big deal. But for us, it was like, wow, we can actually bring in electronic signatures. So people were doing stuff, just the processes in some of these companies are so old, right? They may be thorough, but they're like really like manual and labor intensive. So you introduce something like electronic signatures and they're like, oh, this is the greatest. And it's like, you're like a hero, even though that capability's been around for 20 years. So, something like that could be, or even something else like a web content management system. It's like, oh my God, I don't have to go to the developers anymore to create web pages on the website. It's like, no, we don't have to do that anymore. Yeah. So simple stuff that's been around for a while.
How do you prioritize? Like, I imagine in a big organization, you have a lot of people coming to you that need help. I'm imagine that you have to prioritize somehow. So if you're sitting in between everybody, like the developers and the business, how do you figure out what's the most important thing?
Oh, that, upper management tells you. You don't figure out anything. They say this is the most important thing, and the next guy says this is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then you have to try to figure out which one's the most important of the most importance, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, a lot of times it just comes from the top.
Okay. And thinking of like top down, you just made me think of something else. Like, how has enterprise architecture evolved, do you think, with the rise of shadow IT and the rise of developers as the new kingmakers in quotes? Like, is enterprise architecture on its way out, or do you think it's always going to be something that needs to be there?
I think it always needs to be there because, somebody has to, if they're shadow IT, that's part of the enterprise.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And somebody has to
Yep.
kind of corral everything. You can call it anything you want, right? It could be called
Yeah.
enterprise architecture. It could be called anything you want, but somebody's got to be looking at all of it, and not all of it super deep. That's the challenge with EA, right? It's like when you're covering the E, right, the enterprise, you can't go super deep on everything.
Yeah. That's
There's just no time in the day to go super deep on everything. So you have to kind of keep it at a high enough level that you kind of understand what's going on, but are able to cover a lot.
So when you look forward at an organization, like there's all these different kind of ways to build applications now. So there's serverless, there's microservices, there's the old fashioned monoliths. And, even low code, no code is starting to make a comeback. It seems like it's kind of like Linux on the desktop, maybe. I don't know if the low code, no code
I
folks
wouldn't go
like
that
that,
far.
well, it seems like every 10 years, it's like, hey, we can, enable millions of people and they don't have to write code. How are you thinking about the future and like directing people to use modern technologies versus using what's tried and true? Do you have some way to think about how much new stuff to bring in versus legacy and leave it, if it's not broken, don't fix it, basically?
A lot of it comes down to how much money you're spending operationally, and this is where serverless kind of comes in big, right? Because if
Yeah.
you're setting up, if you're handcrafting software, and obviously there's automation and there's everything else, but at the end of the day, if you're handcrafting things, if you're building servers, even if you're scripting them, somebody's got to write that script, right?
Yeah.
Right. Somebody's got to run that script. So serverless becomes really attractive because you don't have to do any of that. So I think what I've seen a lot of the movement is certainly on our side on our company, when you don't have a really tremendous amount of resources, serverless really helps you out. We're not a tech company. We're an insurance company, right? We're not even an insurance company. We're an investment company, but insurance is part of it. And it probably sounds cliche, but we want to spend our time delivering functionality. We don't want to spend our time configuring firewalls,
That's right.
You know, it just takes too much time.
How are you thinking about cloud in an organization? Like, what role does enterprise architecture play in selecting cloud vendors, deciding on what to move to cloud versus on-prem, things like that?
Yeah, I think that everything's going to the cloud. That you don't even have to like think about what should or what shouldn't. Like it's more like, you know, why can't this go? Right? It's more like that kind of vibe than like what should and what shouldn't go. Like, why can't this go to the cloud? And if this can't go to the cloud, this piece of software, then we need to look for something else that can.
So your organization has a mission to really move everything.
Absolutely. Because I mean, again, you know, we're not a tech company. For us to have racks and wires and all this stuff, it just doesn't really do anything for us. The larger Wall Street picture, you know, they may have some, like, especially when you get into trading, right? They may have some performance requirements that absolutely need to be met by high performance stuff in memory. And a company like ours, a investment company, insurance, 401ks, things like that, we're not dealing with like sub-second transactions. We're dealing with a lot of batch workloads. You know what I mean? A lot of daily stuff that runs every night, a lot of monthly stuff. So you don't have that same requirement as some of the big trading houses.
What about the batch workloads that I assume you still have mainframe stuff running?
Well, that's for the time being, but not for long.
What's the process that you take for, I mean, you can't just lift and shift that to the cloud as it is. So what's the process that you take for that? Is it really just finding a new vendor who meets the same requirements and is already cloud ready, or?
For the mainframe workloads, you're right. Like, number one, you don't want to rewrite them because it'll take you eternity, right? So you don't want to rewrite them. Lifting and shifting them, I looked at this space a lot. I mean, there's replatforming vendors out there that'll take your COBOL code and transfer it to Java. But then you have this Java program, like one gigantic main method, you know? Like, forget that, right? And then who's going to maintain that? Like, you just shift the problem from we don't have mainframe programmers to now we don't have Java programmers that could work with one big main, you know? So really, you know, when you talk about moving off the mainframe, for us, we're talking about more about software as a service. Vendors that have a full package that you can run your business on, and then you're just dealing with integration, right? You're moving all your data to them, you're using their software, and then you're integrating.
And they've basically created things that do everything that your old mainframe stuff did?
More or less. I mean, not down to the T. There's definitely a lot of devils in the details. But part of the enterprise architecture thing is like talking to people about why they don't need all this stuff that they've had for 30 years.
What is your process then when you have to evaluate a vendor and figure out which software package to buy? Like, how do you approach that?
Well, you obviously have to do it a lot with the business, you know? I mean, it's not so much a technical problem at that point, right? It's like more of a business problem. Like, are they meeting our needs business-wise, right? Are they meeting our needs regulatory-wise? Are we going to get in trouble, right, by using this vendor? You got to ask the really kind of basic questions, right? And then the technology part of it becomes, it's not even a technical issue at that point.
What do you mean?
If you're partnering with a vendor that's going to take on your business and host your business for you, what are you doing? You're giving them your data. They're taking your data, they're importing it into their systems, they're configuring their systems to match what you want your business to run like on their systems, right? So it's not so much a technical challenge, you're just sending them your data. But it's a business challenge because you have to look at all your business processes, all your reports that you're getting, all the regulatory stuff you're doing, and making sure that that vendor can match your needs on that level. So it's a lot of business architecture. You know, in enterprise architecture, when you look at it, like there's business architecture, there's application architecture, information architecture, and there's technology architecture. When you're talking about utilizing a vendor for your processing, you're really talking business architecture. What are our current business processes, and can this vendor implement those quickly? From a customer's perspective, will they be able to tell, right, that you switched from the mainframe to this other vendor? They shouldn't be able to tell.
Right. Let's say you were trying to buy like an on-premise piece of software or software that could run both on-premise and in the cloud, like, and you have 3 or 4 vendors to evaluate.
If you're talking about like capabilities, right? Like everything we do is not using a vendor in the SaaS model. We still buy software. A lot of times that becomes a thing where you have this software that you've had forever, and it's like nobody's done anything about it, but now it's like time to, somebody like me comes in and says, why are we using this thing? Right? And then it becomes a app rationalization kind of thing, like where you say, we have these 3 BI tools that are crap. Like, why are we using these things? Let's look at a new one and let's sunset those. And you make the business case around that.
Okay, so in that example, but you have a lot of different BI vendors that you could pick from, right?
Yeah.
So what's your process for actually analyzing those and saying, well, they all kind of meet our needs, but so then what's next?
So I think as an enterprise architect, right, you need to understand the company you're at and what's important to the company you're at. In our company, with not a huge amount of staff, I'm keeping that in my mind. I'm looking for tools that we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on it technically. So that's one thing that goes into it. Cost always goes into it too. If you're a huge company and you don't really care about money as much, although they probably do, but there's more money to spend in a big company, right?
Well, you also have more engineering talent. So like
more engineering talent too.
So like, let's say you were at S&P, you were trying to, evaluate, I don't know, some like enterprise service bus vendor or something, back in the day. And there's a bunch of them, right?
Right.
Tibco, and that's just the beginning. And then you can go from there. Do you have to put the RFP together and put everybody through that process, or?
Yeah, I mean, in that kind of case, we have a tech selection process that we follow, right? It includes first putting together a team of SMEs in the organization, people that have some kind of say in selecting this tool, right?
Stakeholders.
Yeah. You gather your requirements at a high level, right? You kind of crowdsource with this SME team. You build this team, you crowdsource the requirements, bring the vendors in, share the requirements that you're looking for with them. And where it gets I think where it gets tricky with a lot of evaluations is that some vendors can demo the product really well and speak to the product really well. You don't want to totally get fooled by that. I mean, somebody that comes in super polished or on the other side, somebody that comes in that can't get the WebEx working and you know what I mean? It's kind of awkward. You can't really judge the product by the salesperson or the sales team. And that's kind of weird, but you really have to kind of stay cool on that, right? Anyways, you bring the vendors in and then you listen to how they can meet your requirements tabletop wise, right? People can ask questions and then you kind of reassemble afterwards with the internal team and say, okay, what do you guys think? Let's, sometimes we'll go as far as making scorecards, right? We'll score the vendors on requirements. Like how do they meet this requirement 1 to 5? And then you kind of tabulate that all. You drop a bunch of vendors. You may be left with like 2 or 3. And then you kind of go to the next level with them, right? You start talking price, you start talking, getting down to the next level. And eventually you're like, yeah, we like this one. Okay, let's do a POC. And then you kind of see where the vendors at, if they can really do what they say. Showcase the POC to not only your tech people, but your business people. Say, hey, look, we did this POC. Here's what it looks like. And then you kind of go into negotiations, right? At any step of the way, things could go south, right? Like, things could go completely off the rails and then you go back to a different vendor.
How have you seen things go off the rails? Like, is it usually just technically they go off the rails?
Yeah, it could be anything. You know what I mean? It could be that they just can't pull together the POC. They talk a great game. They have great messaging. They have great PowerPoint decks. But then it gets down to POC and they're like falling apart on you.
Yeah, it was all lipstick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it could be that. It could be that when you start getting into negotiation, their pricing approach is like just confusing or way off track and you can't seem to dial that in, right? But usually it fails on POC.
Yeah. Mike, as you've gone through a number of these buying processes, like what are some of the things you've seen that frustrate you the most about what sellers do when they're engaging with someone on the other side of the table?
Look, sellers want to get to yes quick.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
As a buyer, I don't really care if it takes me 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 months, right?
Yeah,
to
you
get
don't
to
really have
this.
a quota to worry about.
I don't have a time frame. You know what I mean? I'm trying to pick the product that meets my need. So a lot of times you get into a situation where the seller, you know, and they'll say this like, well, yeah, over the next 2 weeks we'll do this, and yeah, we'll time box this to 2 weeks so that it'll look great for you. It's like, you're just saying 2 weeks because you only want to spend 2 weeks on it.
Well, that's fair though, right? I mean, they
It's
can't
fair.
spend all their
It's
time
fair.
on one
Yeah.
prospect either.
Totally fair. That's where there's a disconnect a lot of
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. So, Mike, I have a theory about this. Like, part of my theory is that companies like the one that you work at and the ones you've worked at previously aren't typically staffed up to do these POCs. Like, sometimes there is an enterprise architecture teams, but a lot of times there's not. And so one of the operating assumptions I make when I'm going into an account is like, I want to do the POC as fast as possible. Number one, so I can show the value as fast as possible to save you time and also save us time. But also knowing that like you may not be staffed up to do it. And I don't want that to delay the decision. Again, because I have a quota, but also because I know if you're not staffed to do it, it's going to be someone's side project or night gig, and it may take you too long.
Totally. So first of all, there's something to be said about a vendor that can actually get it done quick.
Yeah, get it done quick.
All right. I mean, there's something to be said about that. If they can understand your requirements, they can take some data from you and they can turn the thing around in 2 weeks. Great. Well, what I'm talking about before is when after 2 weeks, you kind of didn't really get as much as you thought, and they're sort of trying to sell it anyways. The best vendor in the world can turn the thing around quick and bing, bang, boom, here it is. It's done. Just what you want. And you're like, wow, it's already set up. That's really a win-win for everybody. You know, because the vendor then doesn't spend enormous amount of time. Because you know, Chad, when we worked with you guys on the grid computing and when I was at S&P, I mean that was like an 18-month selection process. And you know what? The bigger the company, the more red tape. And you know, right now I'm at a company with 1,200 people, about 225 or so in IT. I don't got red tape anymore, right? So it's a bonus, right? I can get to yes quicker if we have budget for something.
Yeah, less bureaucracy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, have you ever been delighted by a vendor?
Yeah, all the time. Probably our last selection of the digital experience platform or web CMS. I was pretty delighted, and we were able to completely upgrade our website, which our website before this was like 1999 style, right? It was like the first website ever built kind of thing.
Was the contact me button like the mailbox with the wings on it? You remember that thing?
You got to have the spending Netscape cube.
Right.
And we were able to pick a vendor, implement the thing in 4 months or so. It may sound like a lot of time, right, to some people, but to us, that was like a miracle.
Is this your website, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's clean looking.
Clean.
It's very modern.
Yeah. I wish you could see the old one because it would be nice to have a side by side.
Can we see it in the Wayback Machine?
All right, so let's go back to, I don't know, 2021, I guess.
Yeah, go back a year and you'll definitely see the old one.
Oh, yeah, look at that. Old fonts.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
You weren't kidding.
Yeah. Okay, you weren't kidding.
Right?
Yep. I'm impressed they used modern Twitter and Facebook images for this. I shouldn't be too harsh. It takes time to build.
You can be harsh. This is old,
It's old.
you know?
Yeah. Well, good
Wow.
decisions made, I think, for sure.
Yeah. And you know, it's the face of the company, right? In terms of the web. So
Yeah.
why not? But
Sure.
But that was a good one. I mean, like I said, I try to, you know, I've been in this long enough that I can pretty quickly sniff out a vendor that I think's going to not meet the needs or not be a good fit for us.
Yeah.
You know, and it's sort of like you could learn architecture, you could learn TOGAF, you could learn Zachman, you can learn all this kind of theory and all this kind of process. But there's something to be said about being able to sniff out a bad vendor.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like a third instinct, right?
Yep. Yeah, like learning how to interpret your gut and trust your gut is important, I think.
Yeah. And it's pretty like, you know, listen, I like to connect with a lot of salespeople on LinkedIn. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh man, I hate when all these salespeople are trying to connect with me. I connect with them, right? Doesn't mean that if I connect with you that I'm going to buy your software tomorrow or I'm going to like immediately, you know, it's kind of funny because when people connect with you on LinkedIn and you accept, like it's always a 24-hour thing. And then you hear back from them. Hey, want to meet for coffee, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, I was just connecting with you in case someday, but I can't respond to every one of them.
Yeah.
Right. So I just kind of like blow them off, and then they keep coming back at me. And the ones that are like super persistent, I'll say, look, check in with me monthly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe we'll have a need for this thing, but they just don't understand that I'm not just going to, because you sent me a LinkedIn message, I'm not going to like next day have a meeting with you and then a day later start an evaluation. And in 2 weeks, we're buying your software.
That's not how it works.
It could work that way.
Yeah.
If the timing is right. If somebody connects with me where like I just got off a meeting with my boss and was like, we need this. And all of a sudden someone connects with me with this, then that could work great for them. But that like never happens.
That's just lucky timing.
Yeah. Once in a lifetime. Yeah. A place I wanted to take you next, Mike, was like, do you treat open source the same as you do proprietary software when you're doing evaluations and making purchasing decisions, or is it different?
They're different because if you want to go the open source route as a customer, right, you got to have a bench.
Yep.
You got to have a bench. If you don't have the bench to do it, you'll spend less money on the subscription model with open source. That's nobody could debate that. But the question is, can you install, can you configure, can you run, can you operate this software, right? Can you patch the thing? It's more of an operational challenge, right? And do you have the operational bench to take that on? Some companies do, some companies don't.
Yep.
And as an enterprise architect, you better understand the company you're working for.
Yeah, yeah.
You could love open source to death, but if you don't have the bench, you better know that as an enterprise architect, and you better think about that before you bring that in.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. One of the things we talk about on the vendor side, at least for the companies I've worked with, is exactly that. Like, if this customer goes off and does their own thing, will they be successful? Do they actually have the talent they need?
Right.
And I have actually helped source developers for customers to help make them successful because they were so adamant about doing it on their own.
Right.
Like, well, if you're going to do it on your own, I need to help find you talent. So I got to go find some people, and I have the network because I work for the open source company that fosters and grows the community, right? So
that's a good customer. If you have a customer that's willing to work with you on that level, that's a good customer for you to work with.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a great relationship on the vendor side too. I hope that they reciprocate that feeling, because we're just trying to do the right thing for the customer.
Right.
And I think open source brings with it a certain expectation around transparency. At least that's my perception.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. When you're dealing with some vendors that have proprietary software, and I've seen this, I won't name names, but I've seen this where the software costs as much as they think they can get from you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
How do we price? Well, how much do you charge? Well, how much budget do you have?
They yep. and the really good vendors, and you know who they are. The really good vendors that have a strategy around this will do it without you even kind of knowing it. They'll ask you the right questions and take you out and do everything for you. And they're collecting information to tell them how much they can charge you.
Well, it's interesting. I'm probably a little naive here, honestly. Even though I've been selling open source for a long time, I've always been on the SE side. So negotiations usually happen without me in the room, which is fine. One thing I have seen is like this idea in open source where you have this price model and then you have discounting. And I have seen reps say, well, I want to go and tell them the price is double. It's like, no, you don't. You don't want to do that because this will bite you at some point in the future. And that's not how open source companies operate. And I've had to help reps understand the difference in tactics that you need to take as an open source seller because of these expectations that are on the other side.
And it's probably hard for some reps that come from proprietary vendors to kind of grasp that, I would imagine.
Yeah, they're not used to it. Like, just for the listeners, and Mike, you might find this interesting, but you probably understand this very well because of your time at Red Hat and just being on the buying side. But when you have people that come from the proprietary world, they struggle with a few things. Number one, they're not used to inbound leads. Like that thing, that is a gift from heaven. Like I remember hiring Oracle
people just
reps.
Downloading the free version and
yeah. I remember working with some Oracle reps at Elastic, and they were like, I don't understand. Like, where are all these leads coming from? And I was like, it's the beauty of open source.
It's a big old funnel right there.
So that's something they have to get used to, but it also has a whiplash effect, because if you get too used to it and then all of a sudden the leads dry up, you kind of forget how to go prospect. So that's one thing I found interesting. The other one is these tactics that they bring, because they've learned these at other companies. It's like, no, that's not how this works. Pricing is transparent, even so far as like showing them the cost and then the margin and then what we charge. That's a model that we tried at my last company.
Yeah.
I don't know if it exactly worked, but I think there's, at least in the companies I've worked for, there is this trend towards more and more honesty and openness, not less.
How much do you and maybe even the higher ups above you rely on analyst reports like from Gartner or what have you to decide whether this is a good fit or not?
You know, I do use them when you're looking at big packages like digital experience platform. You know what I mean? If I'm looking at, just big packages, I definitely rely on them, because it just saves you a whole lot of time of Googling, right? I can go to the Gartner and I can get their Magic Quadrant. I could talk to an analyst for 30 minutes or, whatever, and at least get a feel. Like when we, again, going back to the digital experience platform, Gartner has an analyst that knows that space very well. So in 30 minutes time, they can tell me the vendor's roadmap. I explain what our bench is like, and they can say, okay, if you have a .NET, whatever, if you have a .NET bench and you don't have a lot of people, this product's going to be hard for you to work with, or this one's going to be a little easier for you to work with. They can give you some insights that you can figure out yourself, but will take you a lot longer to figure out.
So you're not just reading the reports, you're actually talking to the analyst at your
Talking
level.
to the analysts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Are there any particular analyst companies that you like or that you really follow? You like Gartner?
Yeah. Yeah.
Any others?
I mean, Forrester.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of like when you're at a company, and I'm sorry if Gartner or Forrester are listening to this, but you kind of either pick one or the other.
Yeah.
Like rarely do companies use both. So we happen to use Gartner, and that's fine. I also like Infotech. Have you ever heard of them?
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard of Infotech.
Yeah, they have
something.
They're a good company, and they go a little bit layered down on the onion, right? Than some of the others. So they're pretty good. They're a pretty good outfit.
Yeah. Mike, when you think about these vendors, these analyst vendors, like how much of the background of the person you're talking to matters to you? Like, do you actually research their background and try to understand? Okay.
No, what matters to me is how much they're talking to the vendors.
Okay.
And how much they know about the vendors.
Yeah.
Right? And how much they can listen to me explain. Again, these analyst calls are 30-minute calls.
Yep.
Right? So you have to go into this call in the first 5 minutes and tell them all about you and your company. This is the company I'm at. This is what matters to my company. Cost is a factor. We don't have the bench of operational. We have .NET programmers, but not that many. You have to be able to explain that to them in the first 5 minutes. And then they should be able to tell you, based on what you're saying in the 5 minutes, in the next 25 minutes, what are 5 or so of the vendors that you may consider.
Yeah.
And this is why.
And usually you find the recommendations are pretty spot on.
Yeah, I usually do. They spend their whole existence talking to vendors.
Yeah.
So, and it's this kind of weird spot they're in, right?
Yeah.
Because like the vendors want to think that the analyst is going to talk about them in the best light always.
Yeah.
Right. But depending on what you're looking for and what your situation is, meaning your company's situation is, because every company's some companies are growing.
Yeah.
And some companies need performance. Some companies need cost. Every company's got a different vibe.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, it's funny. When I worked at Red Hat, Gartner does this thing where they have they can have a conversation with you about every company has a personality. I've worked in a lot of companies. When you get up there in a company, you realize that that's probably pretty true. You know what I mean? That every company has a certain personality. And as an enterprise architect, you want to try to tap into what that personality is, right? Or what the company really wants, and sort of translate that into technology you pick. And it's not that easy to do.
Yeah.
But that's the key to it. If you can do that, you can pick the right software for the company. And I could be at another company and pick completely different software for the same capability because this other company has a different vibe.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I can see that just playing out exactly like you said, because of that personality, the bench, all the things you have to consider. So it makes sense. How do you think about cloud vendor selection and diversification there? Because it adds a lot of complexity.
It does. And I'll be honest with you, we're not really thinking about it right now at my current company for the same reasons I've been talking about. Like, how can we support 3 clouds?
Yeah.
I mean, how can we do that?
So you just have a single cloud vendor right now. You're not
it
multi-cloud.
takes long enough to get your people up to speed on 1 cloud, let alone 3.
Yeah.
Well, the usual problem is that eventually your company acquires another company that's using another vendor, and bang, now you're multi-cloud.
Could happen.
Have you been through that experience before, Mike, where you brought in a company or you got acquired and you had to kind of blend the personalities of the companies and therefore blend all the technologies?
Oh yeah, all the time.
What are some of your hardest lessons learned from those experiences?
You know, you do diligence, right? When you buy a company, right? And it's never good enough. Right?
Right, actually.
As much as you spend time, it's never good enough because you're in a situation where you haven't signed contracts yet, you haven't written checks yet. So the company that's being acquired is under pressure to make this deal happen and not tell you all the dirt that you don't want to hear.
All the technical debt they've been building up over the years, for example.
They're being told, do not blow this deal, right? And then you, from the other perspective, as the acquiring company, are trying to see through that, and you just can't. You know, it's kind of like buying software. I mean, you do as much as you can. You do a POC, but until you actually start using the thing, you don't really know what you've gotten into. When I've been involved in acquisitions, it's usually not because of the tech they have. That's always looked at as debt. Always. Even if they use the same stack as you, right? What you're looking at is their customer base. Like, how many customers am I acquiring in this deal? My last company I worked at, Viacom, they acquired Pluto TV.
Yeah.
Like, what an awesome acquisition, because it got them so much into the streaming, and they had this, it's almost like the open source stream.
I don't even know what Pluto TV is. What
you don't know what it is?
No.
It's free TV, and it's
like
really,
what Roku has or something like the free,
I only know about it because
on
of Roku. Yeah.
Well, it's free. So it's almost like the open source of TV.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, you can watch it right now. You can just get on Pluto TV and watch it, right?
Yeah.
And they could spin up channels.
And they have their own content. It's all their content.
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
Right? They make deals.
Okay, so they'll go license something like Netflix.
Because nobody can have all their own content.
Yeah.
That's not the model of the future. Right?
It might be between Disney and Netflix and Prime.
Yeah, but you see that change so much. You know what I mean? The real niche that a company like Pluto has is that they can make a deal with anybody and operationalize their content in hours, and you could be watching it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? They have this ability to create channels, unlike the likes of a cable TV company or a lot of these streaming companies can do. So when you look at them as an acquisition, I mean, you're talking about opening up capabilities to the acquiring company, right? And that's what it's about. It's not like you're buying them for their tech; you're buying them for their capabilities. Acquisitions tend to be more business focused than tech focused. You kind of assume you're going to get tech debt.
As a vendor who's trying to sell to you or to someone like you, like what's the best way to find out if we're really being considered as opposed to we're just fodder for various RFPs or something like that?
You will know if you're getting a lot of kind of time with the customer, right? It's obvious if they're talking to you a lot and you're talking every day and they're answering your calls and they're answering your emails, you're probably being considered, right? If you're not, then you're probably not being considered. Now other things can come up, right? I mean, things happen, right? I would hope that if you're dealing with customers that you've built some kind of relationship with, I'm not saying you know them for, like me and you, Chad, like we hang out, right? I'm not saying you may know people like that at that level, but I would hope that if you spend tens of hours with somebody, that they would have the courage again to at least tell you, I really like you, but I don't know that we can operate your product, or here's why we have a problem with your product. It's not you personally, but this and this and that, whatever that is. Somehow, if you can get that relationship and honesty with your customer, I think that's what should make the world go round, right?
Well, that's a nice, it's a pleasant fiction. It's not always like that.
But it is sometimes a fiction, because I have to believe that a lot of customers just blow you off, right?
Yeah. Well, and sometimes what happens is they'll come and they'll say, I really like your product, but our executive had a college roommate is working at Oracle now, and they just made the decision from the top down, and that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
Man, that's frustrating.
That's
when
unfortunate. And that's like, to an EA, that's like a dagger to the heart. You know what I mean? Because you want to evaluate software. You want to really put together a team of people that are passionate about picking the right tool for whatever you're looking for. And you would hate to believe that on some golf course, some deal was made and blew that all out of the water.
Well, it happens. I mean, it happens.
It happens.
100% it happens.
Yeah.
It does happen. It's disappointing when that does happen. And I don't particularly like to work at places that happens at, because then why do I even have a job there?
Well, yeah. And like the team that's evaluating the software on the customer side, on your side, like, I'm sure they don't feel great when they wasted all this time evaluating something when the whole time the decision was going to be made by some leader based on a relationship.
And I've seen this happen. This happen at places I've worked at, where deals were made and at a higher level. And then what happens with that kind of situation is, again, when you get to operationalizing the thing, the army that's going to operationalize the thing is no longer motivated, because they know the story, what happened.
Yeah.
So you lose them from a heart and soul perspective. You lose their motivation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Steve, you're fond of saying, people buy software from people that they like, or not just software, people buy from people that they like.
Yeah.
And that is a little bit at odds with what Mike's saying, which is, well, let's get the right product, whether we like the sales rep or not,
Well, but we were just talking about someone buying from their buddy.
I'd like to think that you could buy software from people that you like, but they also have good capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, it's not just the only thing, it's an aspect of it, because if you have 3 vendors and they have mostly the same functionality and they will work a little bit differently, then you have to make the decision. And what are you going to make it on? It's going to be based on some of the qualitative things.
And it's not because like you like them, like, oh, I'd love to go out and have some wine with these guys,
or be on a podcast with them.
It can be an indication of how the company conducts itself. If everybody you meet from this company is cool, you have to think to yourself, this is a cool company to work with.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have an easier time working with them after I make the sale.
Yep.
So that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah. I tend to think of it too, like, if you meet a bunch of people from a company that you're evaluating their software of, and they're all very smart, they're all very open and honest with you, that has to matter at some point, even if you don't consciously know it matters. That's my theory here.
It does matter, because as a customer, you think to yourself that the company up above must treat these people that are talking to me well.
Yeah.
And they're going to treat me well as a customer. You kind of draw those conclusions.
Yep. That's right.
But it goes both ways, right? Listen, it's not like the vendor is the only one that gets judged here. Okay.
Yeah.
Like sometimes as a vendor, you go into a customer and they're jerks.
Yeah.
Right. And you're not going to put a whole lot of effort into trying to sell these people your software.
Unless you're me, who's like, you have to like me, and I'm going to make you like me.
You have a pathological need to be liked.
Yes, dude. It is a bug. I'm trying to let go of it, but it's a bug.
But it goes both ways, right?
We started off talking about psychology.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great point. I've had experiences like that. And, it's funny because sometimes the tendency on the vendor side is to say, oh, that customer's hard to deal with or they're a jerk. But really, it's like, get to the root of it. They're not treating you like that for no reason. Usually, there are anomalies. But a lot of the time, it's because somewhere during the process, they felt like their trust was betrayed or they got made to look bad. And it breeds this kind of animosity, but no one ever talks about it until everything blows up. And I think of it similar to like when you're a manager and you're trying to give feedback to your employees. I don't want to wait for 5 months and say, oh, 5 months ago you messed up and here's how. And I think the same thing can be true for relationships between a vendor and a company. Is like, let's just assess the relationship. Do you feel like this is working so far?
Right.
You know,
and the
too many
best
people are afraid
vendors-
to ask the question.
I think you're right. I think they're afraid to ask because they're afraid to get to know.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
It's like,
And-
I always go back to the grade school, passing a note to a person that you like. Do you like me? Yes or no? That was very traumatic. I did it twice.
What was her name?
Actually, it was identical twins. Just so. Sorry to interrupt, Mike. If they ever hear this, they'll know who they are. It was Amy and Angie.
God, Steve.
They were identical.
So you did both. You tried both of them.
I tried both of them.
Oh man, that
Like,
is gold.
I'll win at least once. I got to roll the dice here.
That is
This
gold.
this was like 3rd grade too. So yeah.
Awesome, man.
Oh man.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
You know what I get is not, I don't get customers that are jerks like that. That does happen.
Yeah.
The ones that are challenging and fun at the same time, usually it's when the customers, it's a room full of Russian people. And
yeah.
that's not something I really had before I moved to New York, because there's just not a lot of Russians in other places where I lived. Then I moved to New York and I started visiting with customers, and some companies or teams have a deep bench of Russians, and they're not trying to be jerks, but they are testing you to see if you know what you're talking about at a very deep level.
Yep.
And it's just, what I've gleaned is just the way that they generate trust and figure out if you know what you're talking about. It's like, okay, I'm going to ask you some obscure questions. And if you answer them, and they don't even, it's not necessarily they know the answer. They're not testing you in that way, but they're just saying, do you sound like you know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And is it credible? Okay, then probably everything else you said is also truthful. So I just know if I'm walking into a room with a bunch of people named Alexei or Mikhail or something like that, like I better be on my A game, like seriously prepared. And I love it, actually. I mean, my wife's Russian, so I deal with this at home too. And I love it. I think it's great.
It's the same thing with Israeli folks. Like people from Israel, I love working with them because they run into conflict, and I have learned to embrace that. Some of the best times I've ever had is working with Israeli folks because they're super challenging, but it challenges me in a good way.
All right. Well, I think we should wrap it up here. Mike, thanks for joining us and being our first guest from the buyer's side. That was, I think, a fun conversation. I learned some things there, little tips and tricks maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, Steve, I feel like we need to get more people from the customer side and have more of
I
these
totally agree.
conversations.
This was a great conversation, Mike. Thanks a lot.
And we'll have to get together for some margaritas and get my microphone back.
Yeah. Get the microphone back, and you got to come down here. We'll pick a new place on the shore, Jersey
I'm
Shore.
excited. Mike's always showing me new places on the Jersey Shore. Like let's meet here for happy hour, and it's great.
Well, hey, I'll be there in June. Maybe there's a chance that we could all get together and share a drink.
Very cool.
It'd be fun. I would love to meet you in person, Mike.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thanks for doing the pod. I really appreciate it.
Take care, guys.